Hello friends, we are starting in a little bit different venue today if you don't notice. Usually I try to keep everything about the beautiful gardens and about what I find beauty and things like that. But you know what? I always, in the past, feel like I wanted to hide some of the real nitty gritty kind of real side of gardening. And that's because, you know what? We live on old farms, my mom and I. And sometimes the background isn't the most beautiful, but it's the most useful. So today is about those backgrounds that you don't often see. Behind me is what I call my plant room. It's not a true greenhouse, but it's an old livestock building that we don't use. That the front room is insulated. I have some big windows in, but then I have lots of grow lights in. I keep it heated because it is insulated with radiant heaters, just a few that plug in, kind of like a space heater, but radiant heaters. And that's where I put all my plants. And so what you see in front of me is what I call the mass exodus at the end of the season, when I start getting all of my plants ready for winter storage. And I thought, you know what, why wouldn't we talk about that today? What I do, I don't want you to think that everything's just always perfect. It's not. It is me doing all this kind of interesting work, tasks, chores at different times of the year. And while the plants are beautiful in big containers during the summer, they have to get repotted and come inside during the winter because I live in zone 5B in Iowa, where it is not warm enough in the winter for all these things to stay outside, including things like my potted figs. So these are my big, not really that big actually, but they're my beautiful figs that I have to bring over here. And so this is how I cart all my plants over. I bring them on the gator. I let these two go dormant. A lot of the agave can stay cool, but today is all about how I get my plants ready. We're gonna actually go over and take a few plants out of their container they've been growing in all summer. We're gonna pot them up. We're gonna get them ready for winter storage, like a lot of these plants are. And when I get them ready, this is what I do. I bring them over and I set them all out on the driveway in front of the plant room so I can have everything together and be kind of assessing it. So when I start putting it in, because there's always way too much that needs to go in there, but I try to do it anyway, I can better fit everything together. So we have succulents, we're gonna go take some of those out. We have a big, beautiful mangave we're gonna bring out. All those things are gonna happen, and you're gonna see the kind of behind the scenes of how I get ready for winter storage. The first plant today I'm gonna remove here is this mangave. Now this is by my back patio, and the big thing about an agave or a mangave is sometimes you have to be really careful because they can have kind of pointy ends. And so you have to think about that. Now, mangave, I find overall are usually softer and easier to work with. But you can see this has been in a cast iron urn all summer. It had some beautiful, I think it's silver mist heliochrysum, then also the transcantia. And it really did well here this summer. It loves the sun, it loves the heat. So when I first go in, oftentimes I will admit the containers I put them in are smaller. They're a big container, but they're smaller for what the mangave grows to. And so you have to be kind of careful in how you get it out. Now, I never mind if I have to take off or damage a few of the bottom leaves. But my first thought is always to go in. Sometimes it's so root bound that the whole thing will just pop out. And if that's the case, that kind of is the easiest method to go with. Now, the annuals, obviously, we're not going to be saving. That's just kind of how it works. So I'm starting just to feel if I think I can pull this out. If I can't, what I do is I take a serrated knife, a really just heavy duty outdoor knife, stainless steel, and I go in and I just cut the roots all the way around, which honestly is not as hard as you would think. And sometimes, so I'll do that right now, that just releases it enough that you can then start really working it out of the container. So it's all just about being able to gently pull it out, which this one already, see now how I can rock it to the side? That's exactly what I want. So then if I need to, I can go back in with my knife and I can just make more cuts. Now, usually what is surprising, I'm gonna pull these out and I'll compost any of the annuals. Sometimes I save certain ones that are easy to overwinter, starts with transcantia, things like that. What's nice is you're gonna notice how small this root ball actually can be. And that's what makes them easy for me to keep year to year, is I can keep a somewhat smaller root ball than you would think. And so it makes it kind of easy to manage. So I'm just pulling gently. And now you can see, minus the annuals, look how easy that is. So I want to show you. That's how small that root ball is compared to the gorgeous growth. So let's take it over and we can pot it up. So when I'm getting plants ready, the first thing I always need to assess is the size of that root ball and overall the size of the plant itself, because this is how we pick containers. Now, I just keep different plastic nursery containers around. And this is what I go into my shed and I just pull out different sizes and think, what is this gonna work best in? The one thing I've been noticing I have to make sure I pay attention to is even though the root ball can stay somewhat smaller, if you put it in too small or too narrow of a container, it then is top heavy because it has such beautiful big growth that over the winter, if I'm not careful, it wants to tip. So I like to put them in a pretty wide one, usually probably, I'm guessing this is a number 8 or 10. You know, and I have really big ones too, depending on the size. This way it will be more sturdy. So the next thing I do is always go in and see, do I need to remove any of the leaves? Just more so for me to make it easier. All of these honestly look so good. I don't really see the need, but if I need to, I would just go in. This type I can just pull off some, because what agave do a lot of times is work up and grow from the center out. So the next thing, soil. You can do a few different things. Now, if you're working with a really large container, because I have that one massive agave that's about 6 foot tall and wide, that one obviously takes a much bigger container. If you want to, you can fill like halfway up with just like a hardwood mulch, and that's going to take some of that space, less cost. The roots, over winter, these roots aren't really growing into the soil too much. They'll grow some, but not a lot. They kind of go dormant. So you can fill it up halfway. It makes it lighter too sometimes. I usually use an all-purpose potting mix. You know I love espomas. Now, I do have a cactus and kind of succulent mix. I find for winter storage, that is not as worth it. So I use the espoma all-purpose mix because it really works for a good all-purpose method for these that are just gonna stay in here for a certain amount of months, then come back out into the summer growing season next year. The all-purpose is able to hold on to the moisture needed. I water them very little, so it just keeps those roots what they need, and it's perfect kind of medium for them. What I do like about this good all-purpose mix, you know, of course it's organic, but also what I like is it has some nice material in it that has some compost in it. It has some nice kind of slight bark-like compost in it that to me it drains really well for various things like this. So the next is the planting depth, as I always want to check that. And so I bring this up and I'll just kind of set it in where I have it. That's about perfect. So what I will do now is just put soil around it like I was planting it or potting it up in anything else. And I'm just checking it to make sure, because what it actually has down here, I think, let me look. I think I have a baby agave coming off this one, and I have yet, mangave, I have yet to get a pup off of this one. So this little guy looks pretty sad, right? Because it's been underneath all that foliage. This little guy with all those roots, it's gonna grow into this. This is how I've gotten multiples of so many of my things. So I will pot this one up separately in a very small container. They like their roots to be contained actually. I will pot that up in a small container and then have another one. I have this all potted up now. The big thing is I don't want to put it in too deep, because with any plant, if you plant it too deep from what it's especially used to, or that crown too deep, you know, water can sit around it and slowly rot. And over the winter, my big thing is less is more. I try to keep them on outside too, but on the drier side over the winter, because I feel like if they stay too wet, especially when they're slightly more dormant, which a lot of these plants, when they're not in their environment of outdoors, they go slightly dormant over the winter. I like to make sure they don't stay too wet. So this one's all potted up, looks beautiful, it's easy to maneuver. These, like I said, aren't too sticky, so I'm not too worried. But with certain agave, you need to be really careful, and sometimes they even clip the little points off just so they don't prick me as I'm working with them. So this one now I can put on, be ready to take it over. But the next big project is taking apart all the succulents. If you remember, we planted a beautiful succulent planter on the front porch. I love to put together. It looks so good. And while yes, it's hard to take apart, it'd be harder if it all froze and didn't make it. So we're up here by the front door. This is where the fountain is. And that's the planter we're talking about. So it's in full sun. I have not watered it, I don't think once this summer, other than when I planted it. So the rain has been watering this thing, and look at the growth. And I know that makes it feel like it's so hard to take apart. And while it is, it also is really the most beneficial. You know, even if I could bring this whole, it's a cast iron container, so it's hard, but even if I could bring the whole thing indoors over the winter, these things would really get leggy and too tight over the winter. So for me, it's best to pull them all apart, each one individually, pot them up separately, and then next year be able to reuse them, clean them up, which I have a video that I did this year of doing that. And you can kind of see how that process works, because really some of them grow so big over the winter, Others just kind of begin. So it's really fun to see their transition during a beautiful summer season. That was not the plan at all. I actually said that out loud, I think, as I was doing it. I was gonna take each one part individually, but honestly, this worked better. It was all the roots were all so intertwined together and root bound that I could pull the whole thing out. So now I can just sit here on the back of the gator, which, yes, is my roving potting shed. But I can take the back end of this, the bed, and lift it and just dump all the soil out later. That's what usually I do. So let's just go apart piece by piece here and see what comes apart. This is actually easier because now I can get down underneath the plant and see how I'm just literally pulling pieces apart. And then what we'll do is we'll even individually take even more apart. Like right here, I can see that's where, look at this beauty. Look at that. So if I take them all apart, it's kind of my first step in seeing what I want to pot up. Some of the flower stalks will fall off, and honestly, it's probably best to pull them off just because they're going to be taking so much energy that I don't feel bad doing that. They're so fun this time of year. I think, it's fun to experiment with different plants. Usually with containers, we think of different annuals, and I do love annuals. They have a lot of color, but some of these have so much color. We have purple here. We even have flowers blooming here. So you can have fun with different things than you would think, and this is what I mean by leggy. So over the winter, these often keep growing up and out. Next spring, what I do is just take a cutting, cut it right off, and stick it in this pot. And that's what happens. It roots and creates this whole new beautiful plant. So as I take them apart, I can see, I just want to show you some of these because just one plant, look at that echeveria. It's absolutely beautiful and kind of breathtaking. And the color on it, I can't get over sometimes how amazing nature is. So I'm going to take these apart and then we'll pot them up. I think I have them all taken apart. I want to show you. So this is what I mean. This was one that was growing in a cluster in the spring when I brought it out. I just cut a piece, stuck it in the soil, and you see all those roots that started all around what I stuck in. That's a dry cutting pretty much that I stuck in, and then it grew. Now there's quite a few plants here, and we'll kind of assess, but I do the same thing. I have different size plastic containers. You could do terracotta, you can do whatever you want. It's just, these are really just something I have on hand, and they're just for the months of winter, and then I bring them back out and put them in something else. Now, in this case, I am going to do the citrus and cactus mix. I shouldn't say citrus, it's just it does do citrus too, but I do use this on my lemon tree actually. What's nice about this is it has a slightly different makeup of ingredients to really benefit what succulents, cactus, citrus, palms need, because honestly, think about it. I don't have their native soil. And while I do also put these in all-purpose soil, I sometimes am trying to test that over the winter, it can be a little tricky on watering. And I think this is a little bit better mix that kind of gives them a little bit more of what they need during the winter and kind of just the right amount of moisture. I love the all-purpose too, and I do use it and have good luck with it. I just think this has been slightly better. So I've been using this mix just on these smaller pieces. Like if I have really big plants, it's more economical to use the all-purpose, so I've been doing that. But Espoma has great products, and I think that's why both work really well. They're all-purpose, but then also this cactus mix. So I always start with probably my biggest ones. And one of the ones I shouldn't say most proud of because I do nothing to it, but is my burro's tail. It is so big that I always want to make sure I give that exactly what it needs. So this has a little bit more of a kind of a nice compost-rich barkiness to it, which I like. Is that a word, barkiness? But you can see, look how big. I know, pieces are just dropping out. This is so big. Now, really what I should do is trim it back because it will be quite like top heavy or like want to fall over. But at the moment, I'm just going to pot it with this mix and we'll see where we are. What you can do with this and what I have done, and this is with, again, most succulents, you hear me talk about it, you can take starts from it. So if I take cuttings, you can start new ones. Now, I do feel probably the best time for me to do that is in the spring, just because in the spring I have, going into summer, much more ample time for these to get going. So I'm bringing it back just to make sure I can get some soil underneath it too. And yes, pieces are gonna break. These are kind of brittle, but they're designed that way because in nature, when they drop and break, they start rooting. And that can happen here too. So what I will probably do is, as you can see, it's so side heavy on this side. I might stick a whole bunch in on this side of those cuttings, because why not? So what you see here may look like kind of a mess, but it really works well for me to be able to save so many plants. I'm gonna admit, it's not always pretty. You know, look at the mess I'm creating. But like I said, I reuse the soil that drops off. It's just easier to be able to quickly do it in a big area. I could have a big tub I pot in, but really the back of this bed acts as a big tub because I can just dump it off and use it. Or if it has excess things, I can put it into the compost pile too. What this has allowed me to do, I even put together one different kind of cuttings of the burro's tail to try to start a new one. This is like my own little, I always think of it as my own little experiment area for a lot of these plants. You know, this is how I've learned a lot about them. Some of them I've had for now 10 years, maybe more. I've lived in my house actually for 14 years, which is really weird to think about. My grandparents lived here, obviously before me. But this is how I've learned that most of these plants like to stay on the drier side. This is how I've learned what works best for me when I'm keeping them over the winter and how to make sure that they survive so the next year they can thrive also. So all these are potted up separately, and this is when I take them over to the plant room. This is also the point that if I'm worried, because yes, as I was potting them, I saw some spiders. If you saw me jump ever, that is why. I'm not in love with spiders, but I cohabitate with them. This is when I could spray them with, for certain things that I'm worried about scale on, certain plants, this is when I would spray them with an all seasons dormant oil for sure. You could also do, a spinosad, you could do neem oil, different things to make sure you're not bringing things indoors. I don't want to take things into the plant room, so that's definitely why I do use kind of a mixture of all those sprays depending, what I need to in an organic way. If something has something really bad, these are not going to have pollinators on them. They're not going to be ingested or anything. If you had to use something to get rid of something else, this is when you would do that. But otherwise, I load them up and I take them over, and then I start working on putting the plant room together. It has been a few days, and in those few days, I have really been putting a lot of the things in the plant room, including those succulents that we took out of the container. And I'll give you a whole tour here of this room. It's not a massive room, but it works really well. And what I did do this year was I had it painted. So if you notice, only if you have followed in prior years will you notice, it was really kind of hard to clean up. The walls were really old, obviously. This was built, I think, in the 60s as a livestock building that's not used anymore. This room is insulated, but it was just kind of getting hard to keep looking somewhat clean and be able to wipe off as I needed to, which I like to wipe it up in between years just in case there's any type of insects in here or anything. So I had it sprayed with exterior paint just to clean it up. But now what I'm doing is bringing in all my different plants. So right now is the ferns, because tonight is going to get to 35 degrees Fahrenheit, which is always a little bit of a uh-oh number, right? Because when it starts getting cold, usually I would say even in the 40s, you should bring ferns in, but I like to live right on the edge. So what I'm doing is I'm bringing them in, and at first, when Brent and I bring plants in, I give them a lot of space, because in general, it's nice to have them spaced well. If you do have insect issues, or I have sometimes mealybug issues is what I had last year, spacing them can help. Air circulation is important, proper space, but in the end, this room is overfilled and stuffed because I have so many plants I saved. So as I put them in here, I try to delineate. I put my ferns kind of over here. These are my staghorns. You can see I have windows to the west, and I have a window to the south, and then I supplement with lights, which we'll talk about because I'm going to add some new lights this year. There's traditional grow lights that, more have tubes. I'm going to kind of upgrade some of mine to some LED lights this year, which I'm pretty excited about to see if I notice a difference. My big pencil cactus, if I can give them some sun, you can see in the afternoon, this gets nice west sun. I will position it in a way that can get that sun. Otherwise, most of my ferns go more on this north side, where they get a little bit of afternoon sun, but more so they get the grow light. And that's what's more important. Same with the staghorns. They like some nice bright light. They don't need to be in direct light, but they've been here for years and they do really well. There's something I had a major issue with mealybugs. But let me bring a few more things in and we'll kind of do a tour. Now I'm gonna bring you right inside the door so you can see too what this room is like. And you can see pretty much, now I will admit, I don't have it completely full yet because it's just easier for me to walk around and show you before it's completely stuffed. If you follow my daily stories, I do always show updates on it and we'll show you what it looks like when it's really full. I just haven't brought quite everything in. So usually on what is the south side, I put more sun-loving things just because they get a little bit more light with a south and west window. We have a big table of succulents, of some small agave. All of my large agave go on a cold side of the room that is really dingy and they kind of just go dormant, but they do really well over there with no overhead lighting, no special equipment, and only if it gets into a deep below 32 degrees do I try to heat it. Otherwise, I let it stay around 40 to 45 degrees. This side is what stays warm. I like to keep it between 70, 75. You can see today with no heat because we're still getting up to, it is 64 outside. The sun and the lights in here keep it pretty warm, so it's a little over, we're right at 74, 75. So it's a great day for it to be in here. And for a month here at least, it will be like that most likely. And I may only have to use some supplemental heat. I will bring in here one of my heaters so you can see too. So what I do with all these plants is just line them up. They're all on just plant racks, metal ones. When it's concrete floor with a big drain, when they water, it just drains. So a lot of these are, you know, things like my whale's tail that I've taken starts of, some sansevieria, some different agave and aloe, a lot of things that can really right now look really good. And so I want them to flourish as much as they can. My citrus is in here. I'm putting it over on this side this year. I have all the scale off of it as much as I can. I have sprayed it multiple times with all seasons horticultural oil to hopefully keep off anything else. I also have lots of large jades. I'm putting those out of the way because they can be a little top heavy. Last year I had them in an area where I brushed against them a lot and they wanted to fall, so they're over here. As we turn around the opposite way here, this side, you can see the grow light we're gonna about put up here soon, is most of my ferns and some different things like that. So I do anything that's really large and heavy and cumbersome, I put on the floor like my calancho, and I put them on just big heavy rollers that can support up to 500 pounds, which obviously these are not. But that way if I want to maneuver them, I can move them easily over the winter. If I need to move things around to even walk easier, as it fills up, I can move them. So anything on the floor, I try to put on rollers so I can move it without too much help. Now, my staghorns are what last year had mealybugs really bad. Again, I have sprayed those with horticultural oil. Let me look. So here's some remnants even of mealybug from the summer. See those? And they are now dead. I've been watching them. The horticultural oil, the all seasons, really has worked well, but I'm gonna really stay on top of that, watch them every week if I need to. Ferns, see they're getting some direct sunlight right now? The sun will continue to move, but it's also, you know, it's not near as strong as we go into fall and especially into winter. So my ferns do great over here getting a little bit of afternoon sunlight, and then they get the supplemental light from the grow lights, which is what we're gonna talk about right now. So this year I'm switching over, so far I've only switched to two. 1, 2, and now here's my third one. I'd love to get even more. So this is a Spider Farmer light. Someone, after I was looking at them, someone even recommended them, so I'm pretty excited to use them. What's nice about them is they're very thin, very easy to hang, very low, you know, they don't take any work to really set up or anything. And what's nice is while they're pretty small, they actually cast, this size casts, I think, to a 2 by 4 foot range. So when you hang it, even though it's a small footprint, like this is probably only 2 by 1 about, it casts light for a 2 by 4 area. So kind of double that size. And so when you also have to remember, I'm not seed starting with this, so I don't need to get it really close to the plants. I just need to make sure it can cast the light it needs. So all I do when I hang these is I have hooks up in the ceiling. There are only certain areas where there's actual wood framing to use, so I have to make sure I put it in the wood framing. And then I use what comes with these just to be able to hang it really easily on. And so what this is allowing me to do is actually have a much better footprint for lighting this year. Now this one I think I could even hang higher if it will reach. So let me see if it reaches with, I don't think I could with just that. So for now, I'll use it like this, just to get it to where I want it. And then if I want to adjust it later, I can. So I try to put it high enough that my cast is gonna be nice and wide, so I get that full 2 foot by 4 foot cast off of light. This is LED, it's that full spectrum light, and so it can actually work really well to make sure that you're giving plants the best shot they have over the winter. You know, here's the thing, this isn't a greenhouse. We're having some sunlight, but as you can see, it's very supplemental in the sense that in the west, In the afternoon is when you really get flooded with light. Very minimal from the south since I just have one small window. So if I can, I like to make sure that I add as much light as as I'm able to, which isn't necessarily a lot, but at least it adds to me something so I can do it. Now when I plug it in, you can see how bright that gets. It's almost a blinding light, but that's that beautiful part. Now I will, of course, with the cord, I'll hang that and I'll hide that. But you can see what it does is it allows everywhere I put it for the plants to get a really nice source of growing light over the winter, especially as the sun continues to weaken. And I think that's really the most important part. While these plants are not full sun plants, when I have them outside in the summer, they're on the north side of my house, they're ferns, they don't get direct sunlight. Over the winter, they need some nice bright light. Indoor overhead lighting isn't the greatest, but when it's grow lights and it has that full spectrum ability to give them the light they need, they just thrive better. And that's for all the plants in here. So this is possible to do this in a garage if it's insulated and if you can heat it. And so for my heat, I did bring in one of my heaters. So I use 2 of these in this small room. This is probably, I'm gonna roughly guess 15 foot by maybe 8 or 10 foot. And I use 2 of these radiant heaters. I like radiant heater because they don't force hot air, they don't blow hot air, so it doesn't dry things out as quickly. So in the middle of winter, if we have a polar vortex, I might have them on high, but I'm able to keep it at 75 degrees. Otherwise, they kick off most of the day, they kick on at night when they need to. It's pretty minimal as far as usage goes. I did this year add over here, you can see a big fan. It's really loud, so I'm not gonna turn it on. That's just to help air circulation. What I have found is over the years, I have certain things like spider mites, scale, different things, and just having better air circulation move through here is always going to help in the long run. Just keep insects hopefully at more of a minimum, just because it's mimicking what's outdoors. You have wind outdoors, and if you have none of that indoors, it's gonna just be a little easier for those insects to and those pests to get on everything. That is really a comprehensive look at everything I am doing in here to get plants ready to bring them in, and then how I store them over the winter. You know, this has now worked for, I don't know if we're going on the 7th year, maybe 8th year for this. And what's wonderful about it is every year I learn something new. I don't know everything, and I'm sure a lot of you have a lot of tips too that work for you. What I do know is the more light and better light I have, the better the plants do. I also am finding air circulation is key. Watering is something you have to watch because it depends on how they dry out and what your environment's like. I find that less water is better in the sense that I let them dry out slightly in between waterings, especially in the winter. Keeping anything too wet, it's a lot more prone to rotting or not doing well because it can't dry out like it can outdoors. So indoors, I keep it more at a minimum. I obviously check it multiple times a week to see what I might need to water. Just like outside, ferns are gonna be more than succulents. Some of the succulents I water maybe 1 to 2 times a month is all, and they still do well. So you learn all these things. Pests is always something I'm learning with. Scale is a armored scale, and mealybugs is a big one for me. Horticultural oil is my all seasons oil, has been kind of my new defense that really works well. Since all the plants are going in here, while I don't love spiders, I'm not as worried of them coming in here because it's not my house. So you can use different things to make sure you get the thing, like crawling bugs. I'm more worried about the pests that are gonna be a detriment to the plants since they're in here. After Christmas, and I take all my Christmas decorations down, that's when I come over, grab different plants that I wanna use in my house, and then start filling up my house. So I have a few months to make sure everything gets off of them until then. So if you have any questions, pop them in the comments below so I can know what they are, what I didn't cover, what you might wanna know more about. But until then, I have a few more things to stuff in here, and I'll make sure to show you in stories how full it gets.